So many of you should have received an email from me over the weekend that let you know which in-class writings you were absent for. So you'll have a chance to make up one of those, right? If you didn't get an email from me, it means that you didn't miss any. So there's nothing to make up in those cases. But yeah, if you did miss any, I sent you a list of them, with the dates and what you missed. You will have until the final exam day to make that up, right? And it's totally, you don't have to make it up if you don't want to, but you have that option. One other thing that I do want to note before we get started today. The course evaluations for the class are available. You can get to them through Georgia View. You have until the 29th to complete them. Some of you may have already done this. They have been up for a little while. I just didn't realize it because I have a lot of things going on and I wasn't paying attention. But yeah, so you have till the 29th to do this, and I would really appreciate it if all of you would take the time to do this for the following reasons. One, often only those who are most motivated to fill out the evaluation do so, since we don't actually do them in class anymore, which means that either I get all the people who really love the class, and while that's great for my tenure application, it doesn't really tell me if I need to change anything, or I get all the people who really hate the class, and it's just sort of a litany of complaints with no real constructive criticism, right? So what I want you to do, just please do take the time to do this. Be as completely honest as you can when filling it out, right? Because praise and blame are not the point, right? The point is, to figure out where the class is going right and where the class is going wrong, right? What you're actually learning from and what you're not learning from. And the other thing I would ask is when you're assessing this, right? When you think about the things we've done in this class, try not to think of it so much in terms of activities you liked doing or activities you didn't like doing, right? Think of it in terms of things you feel actually taught you something, right? Think of it in terms of things you actually feel you learned from. Right? You may have disliked doing a particular activity, but you actually came out of it knowing more than you would have otherwise, right? You may have really loved a particular activity, but it didn't actually help you grow in the class at all, right? So that's what I would ask you to keep in mind as you're doing this. Okay, so does anybody have any questions at all about any old business, about papers, presentations, what have you, before we proceed?
The paper for this class, the second one is due the 5th, right?
I believe so, yes. But that's all on the syllabus and the assignment sheet. Any other questions? All right. I mean, I've already seen drafts from some of you, so what I've seen so far, some of your draft ideas, some of your thesis ideas, I'm actually really pretty impressed with. Overall, I have to say, I wasn't supposed to be, I wasn't even supposed to teach this class. But this group has actually been my bright spot this semester. You guys have actually been really, really good. So thank you for that. Right, so if there's no other questions about the paper or the presentation. All right, then let's talk about Mesoamerica around the time of the Spanish conquest. How did these go for you? What did you think? And silence.
Just confusion and the price story a little bit of what was going on.
Okay, can you give me an example of what you're talking about, Secret?
Like, I think it's when the two sons trying to entertain the Lord.
Okay.
And then at the end, I think the Lords was sacrificed, the highest Lords was sacrificed.
Okay, yeah, right. The lords of the lords are These guys are the kings of the Mayan underworld, right? It's called Xibalba.
That's how you pronounce that?
Yep. I think so, anyway. And there are 7 of them. And they are the ones who sort of gather blood and souls from human sacrifices, right? Right, they have names like Blood Gatherer. And we also have, 1 death and 7 deaths, right? I'll get to what the 1 and the 7 mean eventually, because I know that gets a little confusing. Right, so they're asking our hero twins here, right, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, to perform a sacrifice without death to entertain them, right? That's the idea here, right? Page 1914, and they came to the lords, feigning great humility. They bowed their heads all the way to the ground when they arrived. They brought themselves low, doubled over, flattened out, down to the rags, to the tatters. They really looked like vagabonds when they arrived. So the situation here is that these 2 are in disguise. This doesn't really come through so much in the excerpts, but they're disguised as beggars, right? They had been tricked by the lords of Xibalba to come down into the underworld to play a ball game. And does anybody know what the Mayan ball game looked like?
Yeah, they had
Wasn't it
a
the
ball
one where
at
you...
the top of this wall, and you had to bring it there, and it was extremely hard.
Yeah. You got this black hard rubber ball, and you have to get it through this hoop hanging off a wall that without using your hands or your feet, right? So you're essentially you're bouncing it, mostly using your hips and your chest to try to keep it airborne and then ricochet it off walls. Actually, it might help. I have a video queued up of what this looks like. So I'm able to show this to you because it is actually kind of central to sort of the Mayan mythological system, and I promise that this is getting around to answering your questions here. It seems like I always end up answering these questions in the most roundabout possible way. Did everybody see that? So yeah, they're trying to bounce it through that stone hoop. And when it goes, when it comes to the ground, it's really hard, as you can see, to get it airborne again. The ball is heavy. And since you can't use your hands or feet, it's really, really tricky to actually score a point.
They just use their hips and that's it?
What's that?
They just use their hips and that's
Yeah,
it?
they can use their hips and their chests. They cannot use their hands or feet or heads.
Do they use their shoulders?
Maybe. I honestly don't know. But this ball game was actually sort of central to Central American religious ritual. It seems to have been actually kind of proxy for warfare, right? Instead of, yeah, go ahead, Savannah.
Wasn't it the losing team, they were sacrificed?
Yeah, or at the very least, the captain of the losing team was sacrificed, if not the whole team. So the stakes were actually pretty high, but this was regarded as sort of more acceptable than mass loss of life in war, right? You play the ball game, captain of the team gets it, but everybody else survives, right? And the winning captain gets all sorts of glory and honor and whatnot.
So was it like a thing to want to be the captain of the team, or
Well, I mean, it was.
pick somebody?
It's high risk, high reward.
Yeah, I mean, it's and, you know, it is actually sort of a pretty serious honor. Like even, you know, to be a sacrificial victim in this sense was actually a fairly high honor. And the captains of the teams, even sort of, you know, before the game, would be celebrated and, you know, given access to all sorts of good things, right? So it's like, well, in case you don't make it back. Right. At least, yeah, exactly, yeah. At least you had a good time on the way out. But yeah, so Hunahpu and Xbalanque are avid players, right? These hero twins are avid players of the ball game, as their father and uncle were before them. And so they're invited down to Xibalba to play in a game against the Lords of Xibalba, the Lords of the Underworld. And they lose. And so they are required to go through a series of tests. Right? We have the series of tests listed on page 1912. These are their father and their uncle failed the first test, and so were killed. Right, page 1912, right. Xibalba is packed with tests, heaps and piles of tests. This is the first one, the dark house, with darkness alone inside. And the second is named Rattling House, heavy with cold inside, whistling with drafts, clattering with hail. A deep chill comes inside here. And the third is named Jaguar House, with jaguars alone inside, jostling one another, crowding together, with gnashing teeth. They're scratching around, these jaguars are shut inside the house. Bat House is the name of the fourth test, with bats alone inside the house, squeaking, shrieking, darting through the house. The bats are shut inside, they can't get out. And the fifth is named Razor House, with blades alone inside. The blades are moving back and forth, ripping, slashing through the house. Now, when their father and uncle are given the first test, right, they're sent into Dark House, and they're given a cigar and a torch each. And they're told that if they consume the cigar and the torch, and don't return to the Lords of Xibalba in the morning when they come out, then they will be sacrificed. Now, 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu, the father and the uncle, interpret the Lord's instructions literally. And so, because it's impossible to keep a cigar and a torch lit all night without consuming them, they come out, they've finished both, and they're killed. What Hunahpu and Xbalanque do is interpret the directions for each of the tests figuratively. So, for example, in the Dark House test, they summon, you know, fireflies to make it look like the torch and the cigar are lit, when in fact they are not. In the Jaguar House, they talk the jaguars into not eating them. Right? They use cleverness and trickery to interpret the tests in ways that defeat the tests, right? So the lords then have the two of them killed and burned. Cremation was actually the preferred mode of burial for important Mayans. Most people were actually just buried under the floors of their houses, but important people were usually cremated. And very, very important people often had their heads mummified and sort of kept into, so, you know, more on that in a moment. But so they're burned, they're thrown into the river, they're eaten by a fish, and then they sort of come back in the form of these vagabonds who are going to dance for the Lords of Xibalba, right? They have learned, they say, to perform a sacrifice without death. So they go around the underworld performing this little dance, performing this little talent of theirs. And the lords summon them, they want to see it, right? This is the whole idea, right? Well, the lords will want to see this, so they'll bring us right to them. So then they were asked where their mountain and tribe were, and they were also asked about their mother and father. Where do you come from, they were asked. "We've never known, Lord. We don't know the identity of our mother and father. We must have been small when they died," was all they said. They didn't give any names. From Hunahpu and Xbalanque's point of view, this isn't strictly a lie. They've never really known their mother or father. "Very well, please entertain us then. What do you want us to give you in payment?" they were asked. "Well, we don't want anything. To tell the truth, we're afraid," they told the Lord. "Don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed. Just dance this way. First you'll dance to sacrifice yourselves. You'll set fire to my house after that. You'll act out all the things you know. We want to be entertained. This is our heart's desire. The reason you had to be sent for, dear vagabonds. We'll give you payment," they were told. Now, one thing about the lords of Xibalba in the text is that they usually speak in these sorts of instructions, right? Most of their dialogue is directions. And if one follows their instructions literally, one ends up dead, right? One ends up getting sacrificed. So they began their songs and dances, and then all the Xibalbans arrived. The spectators crowded the floor, and they danced everything. They danced the weasel, they danced the poor will, they danced the armadillo. Then the Lord said to them, "Sacrifice my dog, then bring him back to life again," they were told. "Yes," they said. When they sacrificed the dog, he then came back to life. And that dog was really happy when he came back to life. Back and forth he wagged his tail when he came back to life. I'm so glad they brought the dog back to life. It always depresses me in movies or books or when they kill the dog. Not okay. Do whatever you want to humans, but not the dog. And the Lord said to them, "Well, you have yet to set my home on fire," they were told next. So then they set fire to the home of the Lord. The house was packed with all the lords, but they were not burned. They quickly fixed it back again, lest the house of one death be consumed all at once. And all the lords were amazed, and they went on dancing this way. They were overjoyed. And then they were asked by the Lord, "You have yet to kill a person. Make a sacrifice without death," they were told. "Very well," they said. And they took hold of a human sacrifice, and they held up a human heart on high, and they showed its roundness to the lords. And now 1 in 7 death admired it, and now that person was brought right back to life. His heart was overjoyed when he came back to life, and the lords were amazed. "Sacrifice yet again, even do it to yourselves. Let's see it. At heart, that's the dance we really want from you," the Lord said now. "Very well, Lord," they replied, and then they sacrificed themselves. Now, there are two kinds of sacrifice referenced here. Essentially, there were two kinds of death sacrifices offered by the Mayans, right? The primary one, the one that was sort of most typically culturally Mayan, was beheading, which had a symbolic resonance for them that we'll discuss again in a moment because it's related to other things. Under Aztec influence, they also adopted what was called the heart sacrifice, where essentially you had a living victim pinned down on an altar, usually heavily drugged, because otherwise how would you get someone to agree to this? And the priests would go in with a knife and extract the person's heart. And for the Aztecs anyway, this was a lot less common among the Maya than it was among the Aztecs. Like among the Aztecs, they would often do this to, many, many prisoners in one day. And this is the sacrifice of Hunahpu by Xbalanque. One by one, his legs, his arms were spread wide. His head came off, rolled far away outside. His heart, dug out, was smothered in a leaf, and all the Xibalbans went crazy at the sight. So now only one of them was dancing there, Xbalanque. "Get up," he said, and Hunahpu came back to life. The two of them were overjoyed at this, and likewise the lords rejoiced, as if they were doing it themselves. 1 in 7 death were as glad at heart as if they themselves were actually doing the dance. And then the hearts of the lords were filled with longing, with yearning for the dance of little Hunahpu and Xbalanque. So then came these words from 1 in 7 death. "Do it to us, sacrifice us," they said. "Sacrifice both of us," said 1 in 7 death to Hunahpu and Xbalanque. "Very well, you ought to come back to life. What is death to you? And aren't we making you happy, along with the vassals of your domain?" they told the lords. Now this particular phrase is telling you, you ought to come back to life. Are they promising that when they sacrifice the lords of Xibalba, they will come back to life. No, they're signaling some ambiguity before they perform the act, right? Sure, we'll do this to you. You ought to come back. Right? After all, you guys are the lords of death. This shouldn't be any problem for you. So, there are two interpretations of this particular myth, right? Of Xibalanque and Hunahpu sacrificing things and bringing them back to life, sacrificing the lords of Xibalba and not bringing them back to life, right? Well, really, maybe three possible interpretations, right? One is that this shows the influence of Spanish missionaries on the Mayan culture, right? This emphasis on resurrection. This interpretation, while reasonable in some ways, is also problematic in others, for reasons we'll get to in just a second. Second common interpretation, that this is a reflection of the reduction in importance of human sacrifice in Mayan society over time, right? What few records we do have of the Maya suggest that human sacrifice among them was much more common in earlier periods than it was at the time the Spanish arrived. It wasn't gone at the time the Spanish arrived, but they didn't do it nearly as often, or for quite the same reasons. And that this tale is a reflection of that the lords of Xibalba no longer claim us arbitrarily. The third interpretation of this, and the one that seems to me in many ways most reasonable, is that this is an instruction manual for tricking the lords of death. Right? In the Mayan belief system, basically everybody when they die goes to Xibalba. But some special people, aristocrats mostly, and priests, get to go up into the heavens. At the end of their myth, Hunahpu and Xibalanque become the sun and the moon. So what this is, according to some scholars of the Maya, is an instruction manual for afterlife. Bless you. For afterlife transcendence.
I thought it was a creation story. I don't know, that's the way I think it.
Well, the creation story actually gets interrupted here, right? We have the beginning of a creation, and then we have that story of Seven Macaw, and then we have these adventures in the underworld, and then we get back to creation. So, what's happening in the Hunahpu and Xibalanque story, Hunahpu and Xibalanque are not human beings. Human beings have not been created yet. They are gods, or rather they're probably different aspects of a single god. Right? Most Maya gods had sort of multiple personalities, right? Yeah, go ahead, Frank.
So sort of like Hindu gods?
Yeah, not unlike the way, right, Brahma and Shiva and Vishnu are all the same god, right? Different faces of the same god. Yeah, this is actually not unlike that. Yeah, most gods have different, like 3 or 4 different identities, 3 or 4 different personalities. Yeah, Savannah.
Well, they also said their gods could become human and walk the earth with them.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be different to see, human forms of gods in their creation stories.
Sure.
Whatever this is.
Sure. Yeah, and that's right. The Maya gods did have human emanations as well, and most of them also have a consort or partner, and that's why we see so much sort of twinning going on here. Now, one of the reasons why this is a relatively strong interpretation, I think, has to do actually with Maya funerary art. Remember, I told you about how most Mayan aristocrats were cremated, right? Mm-hmm. So the ashes are then poured into urns, which often have pictures on them that illustrate scenes from the Hunahpu and Xbalanque story, which suggests that this is connected in some way to afterlife beliefs and funerary rites. So it's entirely possible that any similarities here to anything you're familiar with in Christian belief come from the influence of Spanish missionaries, but they might also be coincidental. And here's one of the sort of iffy things about both of these texts, right? The Mayans were the only Central American nation that had a developed system of writing. Most of the other cultures in Mexico and Central America, while very sophisticated, didn't write. And the Mayan language is really, really difficult to translate because it's not based on an alphabet, right? An alphabet is based on sort of like having symbols for what are called phonemes, right? Phonemes are individual vowel and consonant sounds. So you construct words by assembling these symbols for phonemes. The Mayan alphabet, well, it's not an alphabet. The Mayan writing system is what's called a syllabary. Which means that instead of having symbols for individual vowel and consonant sounds, you have symbols for each possible syllable in the language. And these symbols are also hieroglyphs. So it's really, really difficult and complex to learn. On top of that, when the Spanish came, they destroyed most of the Maya books. We only have a couple of books that are actually authentically Mayan, and most of them are just records of rituals. Right? We don't really have very much authentic Mayan history from their own pens. There's some that we can get from reading glyphs on monuments and on temple walls and things like that, but we don't really know very much for sure about Mayan culture or Aztec culture before the Spanish showed up. The Popol Vuh itself and the Florentine Codex are largely products of Spanish missionary activity. The oldest known copy of the Popol Vuh dates from the early 18th century. And it's not even an independent manuscript. It's buried in a treatise on missionary activity in the Americas by a priest named Francisco Jimenez. Jimenez claims to have had access to an earlier document that was transcribed in the 16th century, but that earlier document has been lost. So even sort of the provenance of the Popol Vuh is a little bit iffy. It represents Maya culture at a very late point in development, if it really represents Mayan culture at all. Now, we think it does, because there are a lot of connections here to things we do know about the Mayans and to things we know about other American Indian cultures. For example, the myth of Xbalanque and Hunahpu and their father is very similar to a known mythological complex in the southeastern United States called the Redhorn cycle, in which Redhorn and his two friends, they're culture heroes, are tricked and killed by evil spirits and Redhorn's twin sons then go through a series of adventures to resurrect it. So, the Florentine Codex, on the other hand, is a product of the 16th century. But it's begun about a generation after the Spanish conquest has already occurred. It took that long for the Spanish missionaries to convince any of the conquered Aztecs really to learn to write, to translate into Spanish, right? And it's written in 2 columns. One column is in Nahuatl, the Aztec language, transcribed into the Roman alphabet because Nahuatl was a spoken language. It didn't have an alphabet. And the other side is a paraphrase in Spanish. And what we have here are English translations of the Spanish paraphrases. And so, even as a record of pre-conquest Mexico, it's written at least a generation after the conquest has already taken place, and many of the events they're talking about are no longer in living memory. So one of these things these texts indicate to us is just how difficult it is to recapture an accurate sense of either of these cultures. And it's very, very hard to say where indigenous influence ends and European influence begins. So there may be some influence of Christianity, yes, but there are also native traditions at work here, and it's kind of hard to untangle the two. So that was a really, really long answer to your initial question. I hope it got at what you were trying to point out. So what other questions do you guys have about this? I know that these are weird and confusing texts in a lot of ways. Yeah, Erica.
Okay, so in this book, because it was originally in 2 columns, is that why it's like repetitive?
Which one, the Florentine Codex?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there are those bits where like they'll repeat synonyms of the same word, right? And I'll be honest, I can't really explain that for my best guess is that that's mimicking the grammatical structures of Nahuatl, right? I suppose that in Nahuatl, this kind of repetition must be common, right? Maybe because it was an oral language, right, rather than a written language, they will repeat things in these ways just sort of for emphasis. But that's the best answer I can give you.
Because
and it's speculative.
speculative. It's kind of like...
Yeah, I think that's probably what you're getting is just an effect of trying to transcribe Nahuatl into Spanish into English. Yeah, Sarah.
Well, when I read it, I took it as a creation story, so that's what I had in my mind the
whole
time.
It is, but...
So I thought it was kind of ironic because it was made out like the serpent was like good, he's the creator.
Oh, sure.
And, like from the Bible is like he was bad.
Yeah, well, the plumed serpent is a figure that is common in many different Mesoamerican mythologies. The Mayans have a plumed serpent, the Aztecs, the Toltecs, basically any civilization that grew up on, sort of that, the Central American subcontinent. They all have this in their iconography. And it seems to be related usually to a kind of civilizer god. Right? For example, the Aztec version of the plumed serpent is Quetzalcoatl, the god who is sort of the giver of civilization to the Aztecs, right? The least warlike of the Aztec gods. He's more sort of like a builder kind of figure, right? Institutes many of their social customs, shows them how to farm, shows them how to build houses, things of that nature. So yeah, the serpent, the negative connotations of the serpent in the Bible are pretty specific to the Judeo-Christian tradition. In most, oh yeah, go ahead, Savannah.
No, just a side note. There's actually a serpent that's like a mound serpent in America, and it's actually an American, like Indian sort of.
Oh yeah,
thing.
the Great Snake Mound, right? Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing as the plum serpent. So it
Yeah.
really is, like you were saying, just Judeo-Christian. Over here, it's actually more of a creation type of God.
Yeah, and in a lot of archaic cultures, it was a sort of wisdom figure, because the serpent was close to the earth, right? It crawls on the ground. Now, the plumed serpent, you know, it's got wings. It's a creature of both earth and sky, so it can operate in both realms. But yeah, I think what happens in the Judeo-Christian tradition is it sort of gets conflated with some of these dragon figures that arise in other early mythology. Like you have a lot of early mythologies in which you have a god, you know, like usually a storm god who kills a dragon in order to bring civilization, in order to settle the earth. And you actually see traces of that kind of myth in some of the oldest books of the Bible. You know, a myth in which, you know, sort of Yahweh kills a sea monster. There are parts of the book of Isaiah, for example, which reference this sort of idea. But yeah, no, the plumed serpent is a good guy. At least, you know, for the Maya anyway. Other questions? Yes, Savannah.
Do you think, because I've noticed in the beginning there was, you know, of course land and there was water.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that was a Spanish influence? Because I'm not really, very familiar with Indian cultures, like, from this side of the world, but,
Sure.
you know, everything that we've read about Judah, Christianity, and just basically everything from, like, the eastern side
Right.
has that.
Right, that water comes first, right? There's water before there's any, that water is the sort of pre-existent material. And yeah, and I think that's more a coincidence than anything else. You see that not just in the book of Genesis, but in all kinds of creation myths. For example, if we think back to the Enuma Elish, right, the very first thing we read in this class, Tiamat and Apsu, the villains, are water monsters. And you have to kill the water monster in order to create the earth, right? Most Native American mythologies as well have this sort of, there's this kind of primordial ocean that then the land is either pulled up out of or placed on top of. And that's sort of what the Mayan tradition is, sort of more of the latter, right? They viewed the earth, as far as we can tell, as being a sort of diamond-shaped flat cornfield that was placed in the midst of the ocean. Right. The idea of the cornfield is really, really important here. Like, corn is central to the lives of the Maya in just about every way. Right? What are human beings made out of, for example? Yep. Human beings are made out of corn. Yeah, secret.
Is this relevant to when the beginning, when the grandfather was trying to fix the tube, when he put the right corn and then it just messes up his whole mouth?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are. Yeah, it doesn't actually go into this in our excerpts, but there are two failed attempts to create human beings before the successful one. They try to make people out of mud, but the mud people soak up too much water and fall apart. And they try to make people out of wood, but they can't make the wood people speak and think. They also happen to be very flammable. So the wood people don't work out. And then they stop the creation story and go into the adventures of Chibalanca and Hanapo and pick it back up in part 4, when they successfully make human beings out of corn. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
So when they do the human sacrifice in part 3, is that one of the earlier human creations, or is that like an actual corn? Yeah,
well, that would be, it's not really a human. They're all gods at that point. there aren't really any humans yet. But the means of sacrifice is actually very important, right? The fact that when they're doing the sacrifice, for example, Hunahpu is beheaded. Right, this is what I was getting at earlier with the sort of symbolic resonance of beheading. This is why they did it this way. Because to them, metaphorically, it represented the seed bursting out of the kernel, right? You plant the kernel of corn, and it has to, the shell has to bust open for the stalk to come out. So beheading was sort of symbolic of that for them. The heart sacrifice they started doing because the Aztecs did it. Yeah?
I guess a part I didn't really understand was the whole how his head came with fruit trees.
Okay, and yeah, that's a good question. And I think, yeah, it's related to that connection between beheading and fertility. And also, too, I mentioned that tradition a little while ago where the heads of important people were often then sort of mummified and kept in the family home. So that was a thing that wouldn't really have been terribly odd. Hunahpu's head is up in a tree. That's yeah, it is a bit.
A lot.
But the thing to note there too is that like you can't tell the skull from the fruits, right? It just sort of blends in with the tree. Yeah, James.
When you said like they mummified the heads, like did they actually mummify them, or was it like the old shrunken head kind of thing?
I've never actually seen one, so I couldn't tell you for sure.
Watch Harry Potter, you saw one.
There are shrunken heads, I believe, but yeah, I don't know exactly. I don't know exactly how they did it. Their methods were different from the Egyptian methods. I know that. I've seen full Mayan mummies, but I've never actually seen just the head. Yeah, Frank.
Did you ask if they shrunk the heads in Mayan and Aztec culture?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. That's more of a South America native indigenous tribe thing.
Yeah, secret.
They were more about the sacrifice than
Back to the head on the fork.
Okay. Yep. The head in the tree. Yep. Go for it.
Is it okay to assume that it symbolizes that in order for something to grow or become new, something has to die? Because he did, like, I don't know if he spit on the blood moon and born children, or...
Yeah. There's that weird, very, very strange conception. Yeah, she comes to the tree, he spits in her hand, and she conceives twins. Yeah, I think there are a couple things going on there. One, in order to triumph over the underworld gods, right, you need gods who are of both worlds. So you need gods who have one parent from the overworld and one parent from the underworld. It sort of makes sense in the underworld context that one parent then should perhaps be already dead. So, one parent from the, interestingly here, yeah, the parent from the realm of the living is the one who's dead. And the parent from the realm of the dead is the one who's alive. And one thing that this story represents, right? What's Blood Moon doing and going to the tree? She's curious about the fruit. Is she supposed to be there? No, the tree is forbidden, right? So she is also, like her sons will do, disobeying an instruction. She's disobeying the command of the Lords of Xibalba, more specifically her father. This also shows, the story also illustrates certain Maya social taboos. Young women who were caught violating chastity in any way were killed or exiled. And so Blood Moon, and again, this is sort of elided a little bit in the anthology, bless you, but Blood Moon is chased out by her father once he finds out she's pregnant. But yeah, so this act of transgression produces then the hero twins who will themselves end the cycle of sacrifice and the reign of the lords of Xibalba. And then we get right back onto the business of creation, right? Okay, now that that's taken care of, right? Lords Xibalba are dealt with. We have a sun and a moon. Now we can get back to grinding corn and making people. Yeah, Savannah.
Get the grinding corn and making people, like we talked about the serpent, how he was like civilization. Well, civilization usually tends to deal with corn and
Sure.
All that. Could it be like a symbol for like civilized man?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, essentially, what corn is, what it represents large-scale agriculture, right? Do people go out looking for wild corn? Yeah, not so much, right? I'm sure that there must have been such a thing at one time, right? But corn is basically what allows them to build a civilization because it's an easy crop to domesticate. It's a relatively easy, hardy crop to grow. And so, yeah, like everything, just about everything they eat is made out of corn, right? The staple of the Maya diet was a form of tortilla, right, which is made out of corn. So
it's just like the first two that we were talking about. One he couldn't get to talk, the other one he couldn't even get to like stand up, which is kind of like barbaric and all that kind of stuff. And then now you have corn, which is supposed to be like a civilized thing, and you can get it to speak, you can get it to do whatever you want it to do.
And this is another big, the idea of speaking actually is a big one here as well, right? What do the gods want to create human beings for? Yeah. They want someone to praise them and to thank them, right? And this is one of the problems with the mud people and the stick people, right? Is that they aren't able to speak, they aren't able to praise, they aren't able to thank. So once they make the people out of corn, we have these four fathers of the human race on page 1918. Right. And then they saw everything under the sky perfectly. After that, they thanked the maker modeler. Truly now, double thanks, triple thanks that we've been formed, we've been given our mouths, our faces. We speak, we listen. We wonder, we move. Our knowledge is good, we've understood what is far and near, and we've seen what is great and small under the sky and on the earth. Thanks to you, we've been formed. We've come to be made and modeled, our grandmother, our grandfather. They said when they gave thanks for having been made and modeled. They understood everything perfectly. They sighted the four sides, the four corners in the sky, on the earth, and this didn't sound good to the builder and sculptor. What our works and designs have said is no good. We have understood everything great and small, they say, and so the bearer-begetter took back their knowledge. So they let them keep speech, right? But they take back their understanding of everything that they have seen and witnessed on the earth, right? Speech is good because speech allows them to praise. Understanding, if they know too much, they could rise up to challenge us. Right? So, speech belongs to humanity. It's a central feature of humanity. Knowledge and understanding belong largely to the gods. And when they choose to impart it to humanity, they do so sort of obliquely, like in the Chibalanque and Hunapu narrative. Right? You have to interpret the way the twins do in order to get the afterlife message. Right? This is how you defeat the lords. Other questions? If there's nobody has asked anything about the Seven Macaw episode, what did you think of that? The twins battle with Seven Macaw. What's a macaw?
A bird.
Yeah, it's a parrot. Yeah. A macaw is a parrot. Very large species of parrot. I used to when I lived in New York, I used to be in a band, and we would rent this rehearsal space. And the guy who worked in the rehearsal space had a great big macaw in a cage. Its name was Mikey, and the only thing it knew how to say was rock and roll. That bird was very, very angry. You do not want to get your fingers anywhere near its cage.
You've never seen the videos of macaws that get very angry with the bird with the little feathers that show up? It's very funny.
I do not believe I have.
It's funny.
All right. So, the number thing, right? This is actually probably as good a place as any to explain the number thing, right? 7 macaw. Where else have we seen the number 7 here? A character given the name 7 something. Pardon?
Wasn't it 7 death?
Yeah, there's 7 death. Are there 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 death? Never named, right? But yeah, we have 1 death and 7 death. And what about the hero twins' father and uncle? What are they named? What are their names? Yep. Yes. The 1 and 7 are the important thing, right? 1 and 7 Hunapu. And yet there are only 2 of them. What the 1 and 7 indicate at the beginning and end of a series. First one and last one. So 7 macaw, right? This means he's going to be the last in a particular series. Right? There is no 1 macaw. He is a singular being. And this part of the narrative focuses on godlike beings who aggrandize themselves, right, to sort of magnify their own importance, despite the fact they're not contributing anything to creation, who are defeated by the hero twins. Right, so book 1 is creation of the physical world. Book 2 is battles against the 3 giants. Right, 7 macaw has 2 sons, Earthquake and Zipacna. We don't meet them here. They're all self-aggrandizing monsters who have to be put in their place by the hero twins. Right. Book 3 is the underworld narrative. And book 4 deals with the creation of humans. I think what's important in the 7 macaw narrative as well is the way in which 7 macaw is dealt with. Right, if we look on page 1909, right, here's the beginning of the defeat and destruction of the day of 7 macaw by the 2 boys, the first named Hunapu and the second named Chibalanque. Being gods, the 2 of them saw evil in his attempt at self-magnification before the heart of sky. This is the great tree of 7 macaw, a nance, and this is the food of 7 macaw. In order to eat the fruit of the nance, he goes up to the tree every day. Since Hunapu and Chibalanque have seen where he feeds, they are now hiding beneath the tree of 7 macaw. They are keeping quiet here. The 2 boys are in the leaves of the tree. And when 7 macaw arrived, perching over his meal, the nance, it was then he was shot by Hunapu. The blowgun shot went right to his jaw, breaking his mouth. Then he went up over the tree and fell flat on the ground. Suddenly Hunapu appeared running. He set out to grab him, but it was actually the arm of Hunapu that was seized by 7 macaw. He yanked it straight back. He bent it back at the shoulder. Then 7 macaw tore it right out of Hunapu. Even so, the boys did well. The first round was not their defeat by 7 macaw. And when 7 macaw had taken the arm of Hunapu, he went home. Holding his jaw very carefully, he arrived. So what's important here is where they hit him. Right. Where does the blowgun shot hit? In the jaw, yes. And we've already noted here the importance of speech, right? Of the ability to speak, the capacity to speak. It's the thing that makes human beings human, and it's also, language is what allows Xibalanque and Hunahpu to deceive the lords of Xibalba, right? So the use of language is extremely important. "What have you got there?" said Shimamat, the wife of Seven Macaw. "What is it but those two tricksters? They've shot me, they've dislocated my jaw. All my teeth are just loose. Now they ache. But once what I've got is over the fire, hanging there, dangling over the fire, then they can just come and get it. They're real tricksters," said Seven Macaw. Then he hung up the arm of Hunahpu. Meanwhile, Hunahpu and Xibalanque were thinking, and they invoked a grandfather, a truly white-haired grandfather and grandmother, a truly humble grandmother, just bent-over elderly people. Great White Peccary is the name of the grandfather, and Great White Coati is the name of the grandmother. The boys said to the grandmother and grandfather, "Please travel with us when we go to get our arm from Seven Macaw. We'll just follow right behind him. You tell him, 'Do forgive us our grandchildren who travel with us. Their mother and father are dead, and so they follow along here behind us. Perhaps we should give them away, since all we do is pull worms out of teeth. So we'll seem like children to Seven Macaw, even though we're giving you the instructions.'" These two grandparents are Chimukane and what's the other name? Chipikayak. These are the grandmother and grandfather from the initial creation myth as well, right? So they're able to invoke these other gods to come and help them out. These gods are, in fact, actually their literal grandparents as well. Where are we for time, by the way? How are we doing for time?
10:39.
10:39? Okay. So, all right, I'm just going to cut right to the chase here with this then. What is it that they do to Seven Macaw that results in his defeat? Yeah, he has jeweled teeth. They remove those teeth, right? So on the one hand, this is a sort of natural myth, right? This is why parrots don't have teeth. What else do they do to him? They take out his jeweled teeth. His teeth are topazes. Pardon? They replace it with corn. More freaking corn, right? Corn everywhere. And they pull the shining metal away from his eyes, right?
Yeah.
So everything that gives him his sheen, everything that gives him his glory is taken away from him, right? And then once everything that leads him to be proud, once everything that leads him to magnify himself above others is removed, he dies of shame. So what the Seven Macaw and Earthquake Zapakna narratives are supposed to illustrate is the power of community and cooperation against the selfish individual. Right? It's supposed to sort of be promoting a kind of communal vision of society. All right, well, I guess that's about all we have time for. Does anybody have any other questions? Anything else that's really burning you up here? No? All right. Then we're going to be looking at these same cultures through the eyes of Europeans next time. So you're going to be reading a short essay by Michel Montaigne called Of Cannibals, as well as letters by Christopher Columbus and Hernan Cortez back to Europe, explaining themselves and their actions.
That's the same one we read.
At the beginning of World War II, yeah. Okay, I do have in-class writings to get back to you.